The scorching sun bore down on the endless expanse of prairie grass, turning the horizon into a shimmering mirage where earth met sky. Dust devils danced across the barren landscape, and the wind carried with it the taste of drought and hardship. This was the territory where Jacob McAllister scratched out his meager existence, 30 miles from the nearest town, in a land that seemed forgotten by both God and man. Jacob stood at the edge of his property, watching his small herd of cattle search for grass among the sage and mesquite. 20 head, down from 40 the previous spring. The drought had been merciless, and the bank notices piling up in his cabin promised worse was yet to come. At 28, he cut a lean figure against the harsh landscape, sun-weathered face, calloused hands, and eyes that held the weight of too many disappointments. His nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, had packed up and headed east 3 months ago. "This land's cursed, McAllister," old Henderson had said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Only fools and Apache can survive out here." But Jacob had nowhere else to go. This patch of unforgiving earth was all he had left of his father's dream. And pride, perhaps the only thing poorer men could afford in abundance, kept him rooted to the spot. He avoided trips to town unless absolutely necessary. The sideways glances, the whispered comments about that McAllister boy, still trying to make something of that worthless claim, cut deeper than any Apache arrow ever could. The afternoon stretched on as Jacob guided his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Brandy, along the dried creek bed that marked his eastern boundary. He was looking for strays, though in his heart he knew any cattle that wandered this far had likely been taken by rustlers or fallen prey to the wolves that grew bolder with each passing season. The sound reached him first, rough male voices carried on the wind, punctuated by laughter that held no humor. Jacob reined in Brandy, his hand instinctively moving to the old Colt .45 at his hip. Out here, unexpected company rarely brought good news. He urged Brandy up a small rise, keeping to the cover of a cluster of juniper trees. What he saw below made his blood run cold and hot at the same time. 5 men, cowboys by their dress, had cornered 2 women against a wall of red rock. Even from 50 yards away, Jacob could see the women were Apache, their traditional dress and long, dark hair marking them as clearly as any sign. The men were playing with them like cats with mice, blocking every attempt at escape. One cowboy, a thick-set man with a black beard, grabbed at the younger woman's arm. She jerked away, her companion stepping protectively in front of her. "Come on now, don't be unfriendly," the bearded man called out. "We're just looking for a little entertainment." Jacob's jaw clenched. He recognized 2 of the men, Bart Hutchins and his cousin Dale, troublemakers who'd been run out of 3 counties but always seemed to turn up again like bad pennies. The kind of men who thought their white skin gave them license to take whatever they pleased. Every instinct told Jacob to turn away. This wasn't his business. Getting involved would only bring trouble he couldn't afford. The Apache weren't his people, and the cowboys would make his already difficult life impossible if he crossed them. But then the older of the 2 women stumbled, pushed roughly by one of the men, and the younger one's cry of distress carried across the desert air. It was that sound, raw and desperate, that made Jacob's decision for him. His mother had raised him better than to ride away from women in trouble, no matter their color or tribe. Jacob spurred Brandy forward, riding hard down the slope. "That's enough," he shouted, his voice carrying the authority he didn't feel. The cowboys spun around, hands moving to their guns. Bart Hutchins squinted up at him, then broke into a mean grin. "Well, if it ain't the McAllister boy. You lost, son. This ain't none of your concern." "I'm making it my concern," Jacob said, keeping his hand near his pistol but not drawing. 5 against 1 weren't odds any sane man would take. But sometimes a man had to stand for something or fall for everything. "You picking these squaws over your own kind?" Dale Hutchins spat into the dust. "Though I guess trash like you would feel right at home with savages." The insult stung, but Jacob kept his face impassive. "I'm asking you to leave these women be and ride on." The 2 Apache women watched in silence, the older one's hand gripping the younger's arm. Jacob could see them clearly now. Sisters, by the resemblance. The elder perhaps in her mid-20s, with sharp, intelligent features and eyes that missed nothing. The younger, maybe 18 or 19, beautiful in a way that transcended any racial boundaries, with a defiant tilt to her chin despite her fear. Or what? Bart stepped forward, his hand hovering over his gun. You going to take on all 5 of us for a couple of Indian women? That's a fool's play. McAllister. Maybe so, Jacob agreed, his voice steady, but I've been called worse. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Jacob knew he was likely about to die, but somehow that seemed less important than the principle of the thing. A man who wouldn't protect women in distress wasn't much of a man at all. The first shot came from Dale, who was always too quick on the draw and too slow on the thinking. Jacob had been expecting it, already moving as Dale's hand went for his gun. Jacob's bullet caught Dale in the shoulder, spinning him around. Then all hell broke loose. Jacob dove from his horse as bullets filled the air where he'd been sitting. He rolled behind a boulder, firing back, trying to keep the cowboys pinned down and away from the women. A bullet creased his ribs, leaving a line of fire across his side. Another tugged at his sleeve. The Apache women didn't cower. The older one grabbed a rock and hurled it with deadly accuracy at one cowboy's head, dropping him cold. The younger found a heavy stick and swung it like a club when another man got too close. But the numbers were against them. Jacob's ammunition was running low, and he could feel blood soaking his shirt from the wound in his side. Just when he thought they were overwhelmed, the older Apache woman let out a cry that echoed off the canyon walls, a ululating sound that raised the hair on Jacob's neck. The cowboys heard it too, and more importantly, they heard the answering calls from multiple directions. "Apache!" one of them shouted. "We need to get out of here." Bart Hutchins snarled in frustration but knew when to cut his losses. "This ain't over, McAllister!" he shouted as they gathered their wounded and mounted up. "You just signed your own death warrant." As the dust from their retreat settled, Jacob tried to stand and found his legs wouldn't quite cooperate. The adrenaline was fading, and the wound in his side was worse than he'd thought. He slumped against the boulder, his vision starting to gray at the edges. The 2 Apache women approached cautiously. Up close, he could see the family resemblance even more clearly. The same high cheekbones, the same proud bearing. The older one said something in Apache to her sister, who nodded and began gathering desert plants with swift, "Sure movements. You're a fool. White man," the older sister said in accented but clear English. Her dark eyes studied him with a mixture of suspicion and something that might have been respect. "Those men will kill you for this. Probably," Jacob managed through gritted teeth. "Wouldn't be the worst thing that's happened to me this year." Something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. "I am Ayanna," she said. "This is my sister, Nayeli. You are bleeding." "Jacob McAllister," he replied. "And yeah, I noticed that part." Nayeli returned with an armful of plants and began working with quick efficiency, packing the wound with something that burned like fire before numbing the pain. The sisters worked together, speaking in rapid Apache, their movements coordinated by years of practice. "Why?" Ayanna asked as they worked. "Why risk your life for Apache women?" Jacob considered the question, watching the late afternoon sun paint the rocks in shades of red and gold. "My mother used to say that how a man treats those who can't help him shows who he really is," he said finally. "Besides, I've got nothing left to lose except my self-respect, and that's about the only thing the bank can't take from me." The sisters exchanged glances, and something passed between them in that silent communication that siblings share. Ayanna stood, looking down at him with an unreadable expression. "You must come with us," she said. "Those men will return with others. You cannot go back to your home." "I'll be fine," Jacob protested, though even he didn't believe it. "Got cattle to tend. Your cattle will not miss you when you are dead." Nayeli spoke for the first time, her voice softer than her sister's, but no less firm. "The plants will hold the bleeding, but you need proper care." Jacob wanted to argue, But the world was starting to spin, and he found himself leaning heavily on the two women as they helped him to his feet. Brandy, well trained, had stayed nearby despite the gunfight. With effort, they got him into the saddle. As consciousness faded in and out, Jacob was aware of movement, of strong hands keeping him in the saddle, of voices speaking in Apache. The last thing he saw clearly was Ayana's face, looking up at him with those dark, intelligent eyes. "Your choice today changes everything, Jacob McAllister," she said softly. "For better or worse, your path is now tied to ours." The sun was setting as they made their way into the canyon lands, leaving behind everything Jacob had known, riding toward a future as uncertain as the desert winds. Word traveled fast in the frontier town of Copper Creek. By the time the sun climbed high the next day, everyone from the banker Thompson to the saloon girls knew about Jacob McAllister's foolish intervention. The story grew with each telling, twisted by prejudice and embellished by those who enjoyed seeing a struggling man fall further. "Heard McAllister went native," Samuel Morrison said, spitting tobacco juice onto the boardwalk outside the general store. "Took up with them Apache women, turned his gun on white men." "Always knew that boy was touched in the head," Martha Whelan added, her voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone who enjoyed being proven right. His daddy would be rolling in his grave. Inside the Copper Creek saloon, Bart Hutchins held court, his arm in a sling more for show than necessity. Dale sat beside him, genuinely wounded but milking it for sympathy and free drinks. "McAllister's gone savage," Bart declared to his audience. "Shot my cousin here without warning, all to protect them Apache. Man like that is a traitor to his own kind." The crowd murmured agreement, their faces dark with the particular anger reserved for those who betrayed the unspoken rules of frontier society. In a land where white solidarity against the Indian threat was considered sacred, Jacob's actions were seen as the ultimate betrayal. "We ought to ride out to his place," someone suggested. "Teach him what happens to Indian lovers." "Already taken care of," Bart said with a cold smile. "Visited his spread this morning. Funny thing about dried wood and drought conditions, doesn't take much for a fire to start." Miles away, Jacob knew none of this. He drifted in and out of consciousness in a small Apache dwelling, fighting fever dreams where his father's disappointed face mixed with memories of gunfire and blood. Sometimes he heard voices speaking in Apache, felt cool hands on his burning forehead, tasted bitter medicine being dripped between his cracked lips. On the third day, the fever broke. Jacob opened his eyes to find himself lying on a bed of soft furs in a traditional wickiup. Sunlight filtered through the entrance, and he could hear the sounds of daily life outside, children playing, dogs barking, the rhythm of people going about their business. Nayeli sat nearby, grinding something in a stone bowl. She looked up when she noticed he was awake, and a small smile crossed her face. "You live," she said simply. "Ayana said you would. She is rarely wrong." "Where?" Jacob's voice came out as a croak. Nayeli helped him sit up and gave him water from a gourd. "Our rancheria," she explained. 3 days' ride from where we found you. You have been very sick." As if summoned by her name, Ayana ducked through the entrance. She studied Jacob with those penetrating eyes, then nodded, satisfied. "The fever has passed. You are stronger than you look, white man." "My name is Jacob," he reminded her. "I know your name," she said. "The question is whether you know who you are now. The men from your town have put a price on your head. They burned your home, scattered your cattle. You cannot go back." The news hit Jacob like a physical blow, though he supposed he should have expected it. Everything his father had built, everything he'd struggled to maintain, gone. You need to heal," Ayana interrupted. "And then the council will decide what to do with you." "The council? You brought violence to us," she explained, her tone matter of fact. "Those men will look for you, and when they do not find you, they will look for us. The council must decide if keeping you here is worth the risk." Jacob wanted to protest that he'd been trying to help, but he understood their position. His presence put them all in danger. "I'll leave as soon as I can ride. That is not your choice to make." Ayana said, "Rest now. Tomorrow, you will be strong enough to face questions." She left, but Nayeli remained, continuing her work with the herbs. Jacob watched her, noting the graceful economy of her movements, the way sunlight caught in her long, dark hair. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. She paused in her grinding. "You bled for us? Blood creates obligation." She resumed her work, then added quietly, "And you looked at us as people, not animals. That is uncommon among your kind." "They're not my kind," Jacob said, surprising himself with the bitterness in his voice. "Never have been, really." Nayeli studied him with eyes that seemed older than her years. "A man without a people is like a plant without roots. He may survive, but he does not truly live." Over the next days, as Jacob's strength returned, he observed the life of the rancheria. It was nothing like the violent chaos that frontier newspapers described. He saw families caring for each other, elders teaching children, hunters sharing their kills with widows and orphans. The Apache worked hard, laughed often, and treated each other with a respect he'd rarely seen in Copper Creek. But he also saw the wariness in their eyes when they looked at him, the way mothers pulled their children closer when he passed. He was tolerated because of Ayana and Nayeli, but he was far from accepted. The summons came at sunset on his 5th day in the rancheria. 2 warriors appeared at the wickiup, their faces impassive. "The council will see you now," one said in careful English. Jacob followed them to the center of the camp, where a large fire burned despite the day's warmth. The council sat in a semicircle, elders both male and female, war chiefs and spiritual leaders. The entire rancheria seemed to have gathered, forming a larger circle around the proceedings. Ayana and Nayeli stood to one side, their faces carefully neutral. Jacob was directed to stand before the council, feeling acutely aware of his outsider status, his pale skin, light hair, and blue eyes marking him as clearly as a brand. An elderly man, his face mapped with years of sun and struggle, spoke first. Ayana translated, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Why should we shelter you, white man? Your people have brought us nothing but death and sorrow. They poison our water holes, kill our game, murder our children. Now you bring their violence to our doorstep." Jacob stood straighter, meeting the elder's eyes. "I have no answer that will satisfy you," he said honestly. "I can only say that I acted as my conscience demanded. I don't ask for your shelter, only for time to heal so I can leave without bringing more danger to you." Another council member, a middle-aged woman with silver streaking her hair, spoke sharply. Ayana translated, "He speaks prettily, but words are wind. What proof do we have that he is different from the others? Perhaps this is a trick to find our location. If I wanted to betray you, I have already had chances." Jacob pointed out, "I know which merchants in town buy Apache goods. I know which ranchers look the other way when you water your horses at their streams. I've kept those secrets." The council murmured at this, some surprised that a white man had noticed such things, let alone kept quiet about them. A younger war chief stood, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. His words needed no translation. The hostility was clear. But before Ayana could speak, Nayeli stepped forward. "I claim the right to speak," she said in English, presumably for Jacob's benefit as she continued in Apache. Her voice, usually so soft, carried surprising authority. She spoke at length, gesturing occasionally toward Jacob, her tone passionate but controlled. When she finished, Ayana took her turn. Her speech was shorter, more measured, but Jacob could see its effect on the council. Several members nodded thoughtfully. The elderly leader raised his hand for silence. "You have heard the words of those who brought him here," he said through Ayana's translation. "They say he acted with honor, that he risked his life not for gain but for justice. This is rare among the whites, but—" He paused, his ancient eyes finding Jacob's. "Rarity does not mean safety. We will think on this, guard him well tonight. Hmm. Tomorrow, we decide. As the council dispersed, Jacob found himself walking between the two sisters back to the wickiup. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "The truth," Ayanna said simply. "That you could have ridden away but chose to fight. That you asked for no reward. That you bled for Apache women when your own people would see us dead." "I told them about your eyes," Nayeli added quietly. "How they held no hatred when you looked at us. How you spoke to us as equals even while bleeding. Small things, but sometimes small things reveal large truths." That night, Jacob lay awake on his bed of furs, staring up at the stars through the smoke hole. He thought about his burned ranch, his scattered cattle, his father's broken dreams. By all rights, he should feel destroyed. Instead, he felt strangely free, as if chains he hadn't known he wore had been broken. A soft footstep made him turn. Nayeli stood in the entrance, silhouetted against the dying firelight outside. "You cannot sleep. Too much thinking," Jacob admitted. She entered and sat a proper distance away, but closer than strict propriety would normally allow. "Are you afraid?" "Of the council?" "A little," Jacob said honestly. "More afraid of not knowing where I belong anymore." "Perhaps," Nayeli said softly. "Belonging is not about where you come from, but where your heart chooses to stand." Their eyes met in the dim light, and something passed between them. Not quite a promise, but a possibility. Tomorrow, the council would decide his fate. But tonight, for the first time in years, Jacob McAllister didn't feel alone. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, and the desert wind carried the sound across the vast spaces between worlds, between who Jacob had been and who he might yet become. The morning sun painted the canyon walls in shades of copper and gold as the entire rancheria gathered for the council's decision. Jacob stood in the center of the circle, his heart pounding but his face calm. He'd faced drought, debt, and gunfire. He could face this judgment too. The fire from the night before had been rekindled, its smoke rising straight up in the still morning air. The council members took their positions with solemn dignity, their faces giving nothing away. Ayanna and Nayeli stood among their people, close enough that Jacob could see the tension in their shoulders. Chief Naichi, the elderly leader who had spoken first the night before, rose slowly. His voice carried the weight of years and wisdom as he began to speak in Apache. The gathered people listened intently, some nodding, others frowning. Jacob caught a few familiar words but couldn't follow the meaning. Finally, Naichi switched to English, his eyes fixed on Jacob. "We have spoken long into the night. Jacob McAllister, some say you bring danger, others say you bring hope. Both speak truth." He paused, letting his words settle like dust after wind. "You are not Apache. You will never be Apache. But the blood you shed for our women has earned you a chance. You may stay, but you must prove your worth. You must show us that keeping you does not endanger our children." Relief and apprehension warred in Jacob's chest. "What must I do?" A younger council member, a woman named Kosheta, stood. Her English was heavily accented but clear. "You live as we live, hunt as we hunt, work as we work. The season will tell if you speak true. If danger comes because of you, you face it first. If you run, if you betray, your life is forfeit." "I understand," Jacob said, meeting her stern gaze. "I accept." But Naichi held up his hand. "There is more. You cannot wander free. Someone must stand as your shadow, responsible for your actions." His eyes moved to the two sisters. "Who will claim this burden?" Before Ayanna could speak, Nayeli stepped forward. "I will stand as his shadow," she declared, her young voice ringing clear. A murmur ran through the crowd. Surprise, disapproval, curiosity. Ayanna turned sharply to her sister, speaking rapid Apache that sounded like protest. But Nayeli stood firm, her chin lifted in that defiant way Jacob had first noticed. The sisters faced each other, a silent battle of wills that Nayeli apparently won, because Ayanna stepped back with a frustrated gesture. "It is done," Naichi pronounced. "Nayeli, daughter of Dakea, you bind your honor to his actions. Teach him our ways. If he fails, The shame is yours to bear." The crowd began to disperse, but not before Jacob caught the mixture of looks thrown his way: curiosity, hostility, pity for Nayeli, and a few glances of cautious interest. As people returned to their daily tasks, Ayana approached, her face stormy. "You are too young for this responsibility," she said to Nayeli in English, apparently for Jacob's benefit. "If he fails, he will not fail," Nayeli interrupted, her dark eyes flashing. "I have seen his heart." Ayana made a disgusted sound. "Hearts change, especially white men's hearts." She turned to Jacob, her expression hard. "If you bring harm to my sister through your failures, no counsel will protect you from me." With that warning, she strode away. Jacob watched her go, then turned to Nayeli. "Why did you do that? Your sister is right. It's too much risk for you." Nayeli studied him with those deep brown eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Come, if you are to prove yourself, we must begin. The camp needs meat, and you need to learn." Over the following days, Jacob discovered that living with the Apache was nothing like the simple life he'd imagined. Everything required skill, knowledge passed down through generations. Nayeli was a patient but demanding teacher. "You walk like a buffalo," she told him during their first hunting expedition. "Every animal for miles knows you come." She taught him to move silently through the brush, to read tracks in the dusty earth, to understand the language of birds that announced intruders. Jacob, who had thought himself competent in wilderness survival, felt like a child learning to walk. "Your people take what they want from the land," Nayeli explained as they crouched by a game trail. "We take only what is given. See, the deer permits us to hunt by showing us where he walks. The plant permits us to gather by growing where we need. Everything is, how do you say, exchange? Balance," Jacob suggested. "Yes, balance." She smiled, and Jacob felt something shift in his chest. But learning to hunt was only part of his trial. In the rancheria, he hauled water, gathered firewood, helped repair wickiups damaged by wind. The work was hard, made harder by the altitude and the watching eyes. Some of the Apache began to nod at him in acknowledgement. Others remained cold, especially the young warriors who resented his presence. One evening, as Jacob struggled to fashion arrows under the guidance of an elderly craftsman, a warrior named Kuruk approached. He was about Jacob's age, strongly built, with scars that spoke of battles fought and won. "The white man plays at being Apache," Kuruk said loudly in English, ensuring everyone nearby could hear. "Like a child wearing his father's clothes." Jacob's hand stilled on the arrow shaft. He could feel the tension ripple through the group, everyone waiting to see how he would respond. This was a test, he realized, as much as any the council had set. "You're right," Jacob said calmly, continuing his work. "I am like a child here. That's why I learn from those who know better." Kuruk hadn't expected agreement. He pressed on. "Your people kill Apache for sport. How do we know you won't guide them to us?" Now Jacob did look up, meeting Kuruk's hostile gaze. "My people," he said slowly, "burned my home and put a price on my head for defending your sisters. I have no people now except those who accept me." Pretty words. Kuruk spat. "We will see what you are made of when—" "Kuruk." Nayeli appeared, her voice quiet but firm. "The council has decided. Do you challenge their wisdom?" The warrior's jaw clenched, but he backed down. As he walked away, Nayeli sat beside Jacob. "You handled that well. Many would have reached for weapons. Fighting him wouldn't prove anything except that I'm a fool." Jacob said, "I have enough enemies without making more." She smiled slightly. "You learn." As the days turned to weeks, Jacob found himself drawn more and more to Nayeli. She was unlike any woman he'd known, strong without hardness, gentle without weakness. When she laughed at his clumsy attempts at Apache words, it was with warmth, not mockery. When she corrected his mistakes, it was with patience that never seemed to wear thin. But he also saw the price she paid for standing as his shadow. Other young women whispered when she passed. Young men who might have courted her kept their distance. Even Ayana maintained a cool formality that clearly hurt her sister. One night, as they returned from setting snares, Jacob stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Nayeli, I need to say something." She turned, moonlight catching the angles of her face. "Yes? I see what this is costing you, standing for me. Your sister barely speaks to you. Your friends avoid you. If you want to withdraw your pledge, I'll understand. I'll find another way." Her eyes flashed with something that might have been anger. "You think my word means so little? That I would abandon a pledge because of whispers and cold looks? I think you're sacrificing too much for someone you barely know," Jacob said honestly. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the reflected stars in her eyes. "I know enough. I know you chose strangers over safety. I know you work without complaint, though the tasks are beneath what you're used to. I know you treat our elders with respect and our children with kindness." Her voice dropped lower. "I know how you look at me when you think I don't see." Jacob's breath caught. "Nayeli." "No," she said firmly. "No words now. Words are for later, when you have proven yourself to others as you have to me. For now, we work, we wait, we see what the spirits intend." As they walked back to the rancheria in comfortable silence, Jacob felt the weight of standing before the council again, but different this time. He'd been given a chance, not just to survive, but to belong. The trial wasn't over, might never truly be over, but for the first time since his father's death, he had something worth fighting for. At the edge of camp, Nayeli paused. "My grandmother says the spirits test us not to break us, but to show us who we truly are. Perhaps, Jacob McAllister, you were always meant to find your way here." She disappeared into the darkness between the wickiups, leaving Jacob standing under the vast Apache sky, feeling as if his entire life had been leading to this moment, this place, these people who challenged everything he thought he knew about himself and the world. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new chances to fail or succeed. But tonight, he was exactly where he needed to be. The autumn moon hung heavy and orange over the rancheria when the sickness came. It started with little Ieu, a girl of no more than 6 winters, who burned with fever and could not keep down water. Within days, 3 more children fell ill, then 5, then a dozen. The mysterious sickness spread like wildfire through dried grass, leaving the smallest and weakest fighting for breath. Jacob watched the medicine man, Nantan, work tirelessly over the sick children, chanting prayers and applying sacred herbs. But the fever didn't break. Parents kept vigil by their children's sides, their faces drawn with fear and exhaustion. The usual sounds of the camp, laughter, singing, the calls of daily life, had been replaced by an oppressive quiet broken only by the occasional cry of a suffering child. "It is the white man's sickness," Jacob overheard one woman whisper. "He brought it with him." Standing outside the medicine lodge, Jacob felt helpless and guilty in equal measure. Nayeli emerged from tending the sick, her face haggard from lack of sleep. She'd been working alongside the healers for 3 days straight. "How are they?" Jacob asked, though her expression told him the answer. "Ieu grows weaker," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The medicine does not touch this fever, Nantan says." She stopped, unable to voice what the medicine man had said. Jacob's mind raced. The symptoms seemed familiar. The high fever, the struggling breath, the way it targeted the young. His mother had dealt with something similar years ago, when a fever swept through the Mexican workers on a neighboring ranch. "Nayeli, the children, do they have a rash? Small red spots?" She nodded, surprise flickering across her tired features. "Yes, but how?" "I think I know this sickness," Jacob said urgently. "My mother treated it once, not with ceremony, but with plants and care. Willow bark for the fever, but prepared a special way, and honey mixed with certain roots to help them breathe. She learned it from an old Mexican curandera." Hope and skepticism warred in Nayeli's eyes. "Nantan has tried willow bark. Not just willow bark. It must be mixed with—" Jacob struggled to remember. His mother had made him help her gather the plants, made him memorize the preparation. Desert sage, not the ceremonial kind, but the gray leaf variety. And pinyon pine resin, boiled down. The children need to breathe the steam and drink the tea every hour. Nayeli studied him intently, then made a decision. Show me. They worked through the night, gathering plants by moonlight. Jacob showed her how his mother had prepared the medicine, the exact proportions, the way the willow bark had to be stripped and soaked. Some of the Apache watched with suspicious eyes. Here was more white man's interference, but desperation made even the skeptical willing to try. The steam is important, Jacob explained as they prepared pots over the fire. The children need to breathe it deeply. My mother would make a tent with blankets, trap the steam inside. Ayana appeared as they worked, her face hard with exhaustion and anger. "What are you doing?" she demanded, seeing Jacob handling the medicine preparations. "Trying to help," Nayeli answered before Jacob could speak. "He knows this sickness. He probably brought this sickness." Ayana snapped. "And now you trust him with our children's lives?" "I trust him," Nayeli said simply, meeting her sister's glare without flinching. "If you have a better answer, speak it now. Otherwise, help us or leave us to work." For a moment, Jacob thought Ayana would argue further. Then her shoulders slumped slightly. "What do you need?" They worked together through the dawn, preparing the medicine, setting up steam tents, coaxing fevered children to drink the bitter tea. Jacob showed the parents how to position their children to breathe easier, how to cool them with damp cloths without causing chills. Nantan watched all this with inscrutable eyes. When Jacob apologized for overstepping, the old medicine man simply said, "The spirits speak through many voices. A wise healer listens to all of them." By the second night, little Iiu's fever broke. By the third day, others began to improve. Not all, 2 children were too far gone, and their passing sent waves of grief through the camp. But the rest slowly recovered, drinking the tea, breathing the steam, fighting their way back from the edge. On the 4th day, as Jacob helped tend the recovering children, Ayu's mother approached him. She said nothing, just pressed a small beaded charm into his hand and walked away, tears streaming down her face. Other parents followed, offering quiet thanks, a touch on the shoulder, a nod of acknowledgement. That evening, Jacob found himself sitting by the central fire, no longer relegated to the edges. Kuruk, the warrior who had challenged him weeks before, silently handed him a bowl of stew, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "You did good," Nayeli said, settling beside him. The exhaustion of the past days showed in the shadows under her eyes, but she smiled. "The people see now what I saw from the beginning. I just remembered what my mother taught me," Jacob said, uncomfortable with the praise. "She was the healer, not me. Yet you remembered. You acted. You saved lives." She leaned slightly against his shoulder, a public display of affection that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. "Ayana wishes to speak with you." Jacob found the older sister standing at the edge of camp, gazing out at the darkening desert. She didn't turn when he approached, but spoke quietly. "I owe you an apology." "You owe me nothing." Jacob replied, "You were protecting your people. I would have done the same." "Perhaps." She finally looked at him, and he was surprised to see vulnerability in her usually guarded eyes. "I have been harsh with you, and with Nayeli. My fear made me cruel. Fear that my sister's heart would be broken. Fear that you would prove false like other white men who promised friendship and delivered betrayal." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I have watched you these weeks. You work without complaint. You learn with humility. And now you risk the people's anger to save our children. I was wrong about you, Jacob McAllister." "Not entirely wrong," Jacob said honestly. "I am still an outsider. I still bring danger by being here. Your caution wasn't misplaced." Ayana smiled slightly, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Spoken like a man who begins to think like Apache. Very well, I withdraw my opposition. But know this, my sister's happiness is precious to me. Guard it well." As she walked back to camp, Jacob felt a shift in the air, like the moment before rain breaks a drought. He had passed another test, perhaps the most important one. Later that night, as the camp celebrated the children's recovery with quiet songs and prayers of gratitude, Naili led Jacob away from the fires to an overlook where they could see the vast desert spreading beneath the stars. "My grandmother says the spirits test us with hardship to prepare us for joy," she said softly. "That suffering teaches us to value happiness when it comes." Jacob looked at her profile in the moonlight, strong, beautiful, wise beyond her years. "And are you happy?" "Naili." She turned to face him fully. "I am standing under the stars with a man who chose honor over safety, who saved children not his own, who learns our ways with an open heart. Yes, Jacob, I am happy." The space between them disappeared as naturally as night follows day. Their first kiss tasted of wood smoke and promise, of two worlds meeting in the space between heartbeats. When they finally pulled apart, Naili's eyes shimmered with tears and starlight. "The council gave you a season to prove yourself," she whispered. "But you have already proven everything to me." As they walked back to camp hand in hand, Jacob marveled at how much had changed since that day by the red rocks. He had lost everything he'd thought mattered: his ranch, his place in white society, the life his father had planned for him. But in losing it all, he had found something infinitely more valuable. A place where his actions mattered more than his skin color, people who judged him by his heart rather than his heritage, and a love that transcended all boundaries. The rancheria's fires glowed warm in the darkness below, and, for the first time in his life, Jacob McAllister knew what it felt like to come home. The winter wind carried more than cold when the rider appeared on the canyon rim. Jacob, returning from checking snare lines with two other hunters, spotted the figure first. A lone man on horseback, silhouetted against the gray December sky, even at a distance. Something about the rider's posture sent alarm racing through Jacob's veins. "Trouble," muttered Dakota, one of Jacob's hunting companions, reading the same signs. They quickened their pace back to the rancheria. By the time they arrived, the rider had descended into the camp. It was Miguel Santos, a Mexican trader who occasionally did business with the Apache. His usually cheerful face was grim as he spoke urgently with Chief Nietzsche. "What news?" Jacob asked Naili, who stood among the gathering crowd. Her face was troubled. "The white men from your town. They're coming, many of them, with guns. Miguel says they've been asking questions, following our trade routes. They know we're somewhere in these canyons." Jacob's blood ran cold, despite all his efforts to integrate, to become invisible to his former world. His presence had still brought danger to these people who had sheltered him. "When?" he asked. 2, maybe 3 days. Ayana answered, joining them. Her expression was stony. "They tell the Mexican traders they hunt a murderer and the savages who hide him." The camp erupted into activity. Warriors checked weapons. Women began packing essentials, and scouts were sent to verify Miguel's intelligence. In the council lodge, heated debates raged over their response. "We should move the camp," urged Kosheda. "Disappear into the deep canyons where they cannot follow." "And run like rabbits every time white men threaten," Karuk countered. "This is our land. We stand and fight. Fighting brings the army," another elder warned. "One dead white man can mean 100 soldiers seeking vengeance." Jacob stood before them, the weight of responsibility crushing. "This is my fault. I'll go to them, turn myself in, tell them I forced you to shelter me. Maybe that will—" "No." Naili's voice cut through the debate like a blade. "You are one of us now. We do not give up our people to enemies." "She speaks truth," Chief Nietzsche said slowly. "For better or worse, your fate is tied to ours, Jacob McAllister. But perhaps there is wisdom in your offer. Not to surrender, but to lead them away." A plan began to form. Jacob would leave obvious tracks leading away from the rancheria, toward the barren lands to the south. A small group of warriors would accompany him, making it appear the entire band had fled that direction. Meanwhile, the rancheria would move to their winter sanctuary deeper in the canyons, erasing their tracks as they went. "It's dangerous," Ayanna said that night as they prepared. "If they catch you." "They won't," Jacob said with more confidence than he felt. "I know how they think, how they track. We can stay ahead of them." Nayeli approached, carrying a warrior's kit. Ammunition, dried meat, water gourds. Her face was set in determined lines. "I go with you." "No," Jacob and Ayanna said in unison. "I am his shadow." Nayeli reminded them firmly. "Where he goes, I go. This was decided by the council." No amount of arguing would dissuade her. When the decoy party left before dawn, Jacob, Nayeli, Kuruk, and 3 other warriors, she rode at Jacob's side, her rifle across her saddle, her jaw set with stubborn courage. They made no effort to hide their passage at first, leaving clear tracks, abandoned campsites with still warm fires, anything to draw pursuit away from the vulnerable families moving to safety. On the second day, Kuruk's scouts reported dust clouds to the north, riders coming fast, at least 30 men. Kuruk reported, "Well armed. They have Apache scouts with them, reservation Indians tracking their own kind for white man's gold." The betrayal stung worse than winter wind. Jacob knew the desperation that drove some Apache to work for the army, but it made their situation infinitely more dangerous. Reservation scouts would see through simple tricks. "We need to split up," Jacob decided. "Make them choose which trail to follow." They divided into 3 groups, each leaving clear signs heading different directions. Jacob and Nayeli went southeast, toward the lava beds where horses struggled and tracking became treacherous. As they rode, Jacob found himself stealing glances at the woman beside him, memorizing her profile against the harsh landscape. "Stop looking at me like you're saying goodbye," she said without turning her head. "I'm not—" You think to do something foolish and noble if they get too close." Now she did look at him, her dark eyes fierce. "Remember, Jacob McAllister, I did not stand as your shadow to watch you throw your life away. We survived together or not at all." The pursuit drew closer. They could see dust clouds, hear occasional shouts echoing off canyon walls. The reservation scouts were good, following trails Jacob thought he'd concealed. As the sun reached its peak on the 3rd day, they found themselves trapped in a box canyon, sheer walls on 3 sides and riders approaching the entrance. "So much for my brilliant plan," Jacob said bitterly. Nayeli checked her rifle with calm efficiency. "It was a good plan, but the spirits have their own ideas." She looked around the canyon, her expression thoughtful rather than fearful. "This is a good place." "A good place to die. A good place to live," she corrected. "If we have the courage." The first riders appeared at the canyon mouth, Bart Hutchins leading them, his face twisted with hate and anticipation. Behind him rode 24 men from Copper Creek, faces Jacob recognized from his former life. Men who had sneered at his poverty now come to hunt him like an animal. "McAllister," Bart's voice boomed off the canyon walls. "Come out, and we might let your squaw live." Rage flared in Jacob's chest at the slur, but Nayeli placed a calming hand on his arm. "Words are nothing. Actions speak truth." They had good cover behind fallen rocks, water from a small spring, and enough ammunition to make any assault costly. But they were still 2 against many, and the day was long. "I'll try to talk to them," Jacob said. "Some of these men knew my father. Maybe—" A shot rang out, rock chips exploding near his head. So much for negotiation. The battle was fierce and desperate. Jacob and Nayeli fought with the precision of 2 people who had learned to move as one, covering each other's reloads, calling out warnings. Jacob's knowledge of the men attacking them proved valuable. He knew who was impulsive, who was cautious, who couldn't shoot straight afternoon whiskey. But ammunition ran low, and the attackers grew bolder. Just when it seemed they would be overrun, war cries echoed from the canyon rim. Kuruk and the other warriors appeared on the heights, having circled back when they realized the true threat. Caught between defenders below and warriors above, the Copper Creek men found themselves in a deadly crossfire. The reservation scouts were the first to flee, unwilling to die for white men's vengeance. Others followed, Bart Hutchins screaming curses at their cowardice. In the end, only a handful remained. pinned down and out of options. "This isn't over. McAllister!" Bart shouted as he retreated with his remaining men. "The army will hear about this. They'll burn every Apache camp from here to Mexico." As the dust settled and the attackers disappeared, Jacob slumped against the rocks, exhausted and bleeding from a grazing wound on his shoulder. Nayeli was at his side instantly, checking the injury with gentle hands. "You see," she said softly, "a good place to live." Kuruk approached, his usual hostility replaced by something that might have been respect. "You fought well, white man. Like Apache." "He is Apache," Nayeli corrected firmly, "in every way that matters." They returned to find the rancheria safely established in its winter sanctuary, the people anxious but unharmed. The reunion was bittersweet, joy at survival tempered by the knowledge that their location was no longer secret, that more trouble would surely come. That night, as the camp processed what had happened, Chief Naichi called Jacob before the council once more. This time, Jacob stood with Nayeli's hand openly in his, their survival having burned away any need for pretense about their feelings. "The season of testing is not over," the chief said gravely. "But you have proven that your heart beats with ours. The danger you brought, you also faced. The blood you shed was for our protection." He paused, ancient eyes studying them both. "There will be harder days ahead. The white men will not forget. But you have earned the right to face those days as one of us." As the council dispersed, Ayana approached. "You protected my sister," she said simply. "For that, you have my gratitude and my loyalty." She embraced Nayeli, then, to Jacob's surprise, embraced him as well. "Welcome to the family, brother." Later, standing under stars sharp as glass in the winter sky, Jacob and Nayeli looked out over the sleeping camp. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the threat of army retaliation, the need to find new trading partners, the constant struggle for survival in a world increasingly hostile to Apache existence. But tonight, they were alive, together, and home. Jacob thought of the man he'd been just months ago, alone and desperate on a failing ranch, and marveled at the journey. He'd lost everything he thought defined him, only to discover who he truly was. "No regrets?" Nayeli asked, reading his thoughts as she so often did. "Only one," Jacob said, pulling her closer, "that it took me so long to find where I belong." In the distance, a wolf howled, and its pack answered, a reminder that even in the harshest landscape, family endured. The Apache had a saying, "The earth is our mother, the sky our father, and all who respect them are our relations." Jacob finally understood what that meant. He was no longer a poor rancher taken to tribal council. He was a man who had found his true people and who would defend them with his last breath. The spring moon cast long shadows across the rancheria when the council gathered for the third time about Jacob McAllister. But this meeting carried a different weight, the air heavy with grief and recrimination. 3 warriors had died in the last army patrol encounter, and the whispers had grown to open accusations. "He brings death to us," spoke Tahoma, an elder whose grandson was among the fallen. "Since the white man came, we have known no peace. Our hiding places are discovered. Our young men die defending him." Jacob stood before the assembly, Nayeli at his side. He could feel the shift in the camp's mood, fear and loss hardening into resentment. Even some who had welcomed him now avoided his eyes. Chief Naichi raised his hand for silence. "We will hear all words, but let them be spoken with respect. Jacob McAllister has bled with us, fought beside us. This grants him the right to be heard." "Rights?" Bidsel, a warrior who had lost his brother, stepped forward. "What rights do the dead have? My brother would live if not for him. Our camp would be safe if not for him." "You speak from grief," Ayana interjected, surprising everyone by defending Jacob. "But grief clouds wisdom. The white men's hatred of us existed before Jacob came. It will exist if he leaves. But their hatred focuses here because of him." Another voice called out, "Send him away, and perhaps they will leave us in peace." Nayeli's voice rang clear in the night air. "And what of honor?" What of the promises made? Are we to become like the whites, casting out our own when times grow hard? The debate raged on, voices rising and falling like storm winds. Jacob listened to it all, his heart heavy. These people had given him everything: acceptance, purpose, love, and his presence repaid them with death and danger. Finally, he stepped forward. "Enough," he said quietly, but his voice carried, "I will not be the cause of more division among you. Tomorrow, I leave." "No," Niley gripped his arm. "You cannot." "I must," Jacob said gently, meeting her fierce gaze. "Look around, Niley. Your people tear themselves apart because of me. How many more must die? How many more children must grow up without fathers?" Chief Naichi studied him with those ancient, knowing eyes. "And where will you go? Jacob McAllister. The whites want you dead. You cannot return to their world." "Perhaps not," Jacob admitted. "But I can lead them away from here. Far away. Maybe California, maybe Mexico. Somewhere they'll stop looking, stop connecting me to this band." "You would go alone?" Karuk asked. The warrior who had once been his greatest opponent now looked troubled. "It's the only way," Jacob replied. "One man can disappear easier than two." "Then you are a fool," Niley said, her voice sharp with pain and anger. "And I am a greater fool for believing in you." She turned and stalked away, leaving Jacob feeling as if she'd taken his heart with her. The council continued to debate, but Jacob barely heard them. His decision was made. That night, he prepared quietly, gathering supplies, checking his weapons, writing a letter he hoped someone could read to Nayeli after he was gone. He didn't expect her to come to him, but she appeared in his shelter as the camp settled into sleep. Her eyes were red from crying, but her jaw was set with determination. "If you leave, I follow," she said simply. That is not a threat or a plea. It is a fact, like the sun rising. "Nayeli, no." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "You think you protect me by leaving, but you only break us both. My place is beside you, here in California, in Mexico, in the spirit world if necessary. That was decided the day I stood as your shadow." They held each other in the darkness, neither speaking, both knowing that words couldn't bridge the chasm between love and duty. Finally, Niley pulled back, studying his face in the dim light. "The council will decide tomorrow," she said. "Promise me you will abide by their decision, whatever it is." Jacob hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I promise." The next evening came too quickly. The entire rancheria gathered, the tension palpable as Chief Naichi stood to speak. His weathered face showed the weight of leadership, the impossible balance between protecting his people and maintaining their values. "We have thought long on this matter," he began. "Some say Jacob McAllister must go to save us from white vengeance. Others say he must stay to preserve our honor. Both speak truth." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled people. "But there is a third truth. The whites who hunt him will not stop if he leaves. They have tasted Apache blood and found us vulnerable. They will come again, with or without Jacob McAllister among us." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was not what either faction had expected to hear. "Therefore," Naichi continued, "we face a choice not about one man, but about who we are. Do we bend to fear? Do we cast out those who have proven their loyalty? Or do we stand as Apache have always stood, together, against whatever comes?" Old Tahoma struggled to his feet. "My grandson is dead," he said, his voice cracking. "My heart cries for vengeance, but—" He looked directly at Jacob. "My grandson died as a warrior, defending his people, all his people, including you, white man who is no longer white." The old man's words seemed to shift something in the gathering. One by one, others spoke, some still angry, some fearful, but many beginning to remember the healing of the children, the battles fought together, the bonds forged in hardship. Finally, Naichi called for the decision. "Those who say Jacob McAllister must leave, stand to the south." About a third of the people moved to the southern side of the circle. Jacob's heart sank, even though he'd expected worse. "Those who say he stays, stand to the north." The majority moved north, including Ayana, Kuruk, and many Jacob had come to consider friends. The division was clear, but not overwhelming, and those who trust the spirits to guide us remain in the center. A handful of elders and spiritual leaders stayed put, including Naichi himself. The old chief nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already known. The people have spoken, but the division wounds us. Therefore, I offer this path. Jacob McAllister may stay, but not as burden or protected one. He must take his place fully, with all rights and all responsibilities of a warrior of this band. And the chief's eyes found Nayeli in the crowd. If there is to be a binding between him and Nayeli, daughter of Dakeya, let it be done properly, with all ceremonies, so that none can question his place among us. The gathering erupted in discussion. A marriage ceremony would make Jacob's position unassailable by Apache law. Family could never be cast out. But it also meant that Nayeli's fate would be permanently bound to his, for better or worse. Nayeli stepped forward without hesitation. I accept, if he will have me. All eyes turned to Jacob. This was more than marriage. It was a final, irrevocable choice. To accept meant truly leaving his old life behind, becoming Apache not just in practice, but in the deepest spiritual sense. He thought of his father's dreams of building a cattle empire, of the life planned for him before it all went wrong. Then he looked at Nayeli, at the people who had bled for him and with him, at the stark beauty of this hard land that had become home. I accept, he said, his voice strong and clear. With gratitude and humility, I accept. The camp's mood shifted like wind changing direction. Even those who had stood for his exile seemed to relax slightly. A proper marriage ceremony would take time to prepare, but the declaration itself carried weight. As people dispersed to begin preparations, Ayana approached. You understand what this means? She asked. Apache marriage is not like white marriage. It is a binding of spirits, of families, of futures, forever. I understand, Jacob said, then smiled slightly. Though I think my spirit was bound to hers from the day she stood as my shadow. Ayana actually smiled back. Perhaps it was. The spirits work in mysterious ways, bringing a poor rancher to our council to change all our lives. That night, as the camp buzzed with wedding preparations despite the uncertain future, Jacob and Nayeli sat together watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The army still searched. Bart Hutchins still plotted revenge. And the Apache way of life grew more precarious with each passing season. But tonight, they had chosen each other and been chosen by the people. The council had spoken not just about one man's fate, but about what kind of people they would be in the face of adversity. And in that choice, Jacob found something he'd never expected. Not just acceptance or love, but transformation. No more thoughts of leaving? Nayeli asked, her head resting against his shoulder. Never, Jacob promised. This is my place, these are my people, and you are my heart. Whatever comes, we face it together. In the distance, drums began to beat, not war drums, but celebration. The sound echoed off canyon walls and up to the stars, declaring to all who would listen that the Apache endured, that love conquered fear, and that sometimes the greatest journeys led not to new places, but to discovering where you belonged all along. The dawn came blood-red over the canyon walls, an omen that made even the bravest warriors uneasy. Jacob woke to the sound of running feet and urgent voices. Scouts had returned in the night with dire news. A massive force was moving toward them. Not just Bart Hutchins and his vigilantes, but 2 full cavalry companies, complete with supply wagons and Apache scouts from the reservation. They mean to end us, Chief Naichi said grimly as the leadership gathered. This is not a raid or skirmish. They come to destroy. The numbers were devastating. Over 200 soldiers plus civilian volunteers, against barely 50 Apache warriors. The winter sanctuary that had protected them now threatened to become a trap. We must scatter, urged Kosheta. Split into family groups, disappear into the mountains, and be hunted down one by one, Kuruk countered. Better to die together as warriors than be picked off like rabbits. Jacob studied the canyon's geography in his mind, remembering every detail from months of hunting and scouting. There might be another way, he said slowly. Not victory, but survival. All eyes turned to him. Speak, Naichi commanded. The old mine shaft, 3 miles north. It connects to a network of caves that exit beyond Eagle's Peak. If we could hold them at the canyon entrance long enough for the families to escape through the caves. The caves are treacherous, Ayana pointed out. Dark, narrow, easy to get lost. But passable, Jacob insisted. I have explored them. With guides who know the way, we could get everyone through. And who holds the canyon while families flee? Bidzil asked harshly. Who dies so others live? I do, Jacob said quietly. This attack comes because of me. Let me make it right. Give me 20 volunteers, and we'll buy you the time you need. No. Nayeli's voice was steel. We decided, together or not at all. That was before. That was forever. She interrupted. Do not insult me by suggesting otherwise. The debate was fierce but brief. Time was against them. Finally, a plan emerged, a fighting retreat to the mine entrance, with warriors holding key positions while families moved through the caves. It was desperate, probably suicidal for those who stayed to fight, but it offered hope for the vulnerable. As the camp erupted into controlled chaos, weapons distributed, children bundled for travel, precious items abandoned, Jacob found himself checking rifles alongside Karuk. You have changed much, white man, the warrior said quietly. When you came, I saw only an outsider bringing trouble. Now I see a brother willing to die for us. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Jacob replied, but they both knew the odds. The attack came with the full morning sun. Cavalry bugles echoed off canyon walls as the first wave appeared, soldiers in blue uniforms advancing in disciplined lines. Civilian volunteers spread out on the flanks. The Apache had chosen their positions well. The canyon narrowed at several points, creating natural kill zones. The first volleys from hidden defenders sent soldiers scrambling for cover, buying precious time as families hurried toward the mine. Jacob fought from a cluster of boulders overlooking the main approach. Nayeli beside him despite his pleas for her to go with the families. Their rifles spoke in deadly harmony, forcing attackers back again and again. But numbers tell, and ammunition runs low. As the sun climbed higher, the defenders were forced to give ground, falling back to the next position, then the next. Jacob saw Dakota fall, chest blooming red. Young Kitchi, barely 16, crumpled silently among the rocks. Each loss tore at him. These friends who were dying because he'd brought violence to their door. The families are through, a runner gasped out. Chief Naichi orders the final retreat. This was the most dangerous part. Warriors breaking contact and racing for the mine while under fire. They moved in groups, some covering while others ran. But the soldiers pressed hard. Sensing victory, Jacob and 6 others held the final position before the mine entrance, pouring fire into the advancing troops while the last warriors disappeared into the darkness. His rifle clicked empty, ammunition gone. Around him, others faced the same. Go, he shouted to the remaining defenders. I'll hold them. Together or not at all, Nayeli repeated, drawing her knife as soldiers appeared through the gun smoke barely 30 yards away. That's when Bart Hutchins emerged from behind the cavalry line, his face twisted with triumph. McAllister! Finally got you cornered like the dog you are. Jacob stood slowly, hands visible but ready. If he could keep Bart talking, by even a few more seconds. It's me you want. Hutchins, let the others go. You've got no quarrel with them. Bart laughed ugly. No quarrel? They harbored a murderer, fought against lawful authority. They'll hang or get shipped to the reservation. What's left of them? The only murderer here is you. Jacob shot back. How many Apache children have died because of men like you? How many peaceful camps destroyed? Savages ain't people. McAllister thought even a failure like you would know that. Bart raised his rifle. But don't worry. I'll take good care of your squaw after you're dead. Real good care. The rage that filled Jacob was pure and cleansing as fire. But before he could move, Naeli's knife flashed through the air, burying itself in Bart's shoulder. He screamed, dropping his rifle, and chaos erupted. Jacob grabbed Naeli and dove for the mine entrance as bullets filled the air where they'd been standing. They ran into darkness, guided more by memory than sight, listening to pursuit echoing behind them. The caves were a nightmare of narrow passages, sudden drops, and confusing branches. But Jacob had spoken true. He knew the way. And gradually the sounds of pursuit fell behind as soldiers balked at following Apache into unknown darkness. They emerged hours later on the far side of the mountain, where the scattered band was regrouping. The cost had been terrible. 8 warriors dead, several wounded, but the families had survived. The army, satisfied with driving them from the winter sanctuary, hadn't pursued beyond the caves. As healers tended the wounded and people mourned the dead, Chief Naichi called the survivors together. They stood in a natural bowl among the peaks, refugees in their own land, but alive and unbroken. "We have lost much," the chief said, his voice carrying across the gathered people. "Good warriors, our winter home, perhaps any hope of peace with the whites, but we survive, as Apache have always survived." He looked directly at Jacob. "Some may say this proves we should have cast you out. I say it proves we were right to keep you. You fought as Apache, bled as Apache, were willing to die as Apache. The color of your skin matters less than the color of your heart." Old Tahoma, who had lost yet another family member in the battle, spoke up. "The white man's war against us would have come regardless. At least now we have warriors who understand their thinking, their tactics." He met Jacob's eyes. "You are Apache now, in blood and battle. Let none say otherwise." As the band began the hard work of finding new shelter, tending wounds, and planning survival, Jacob and Naeli found a moment alone on a ledge overlooking the vast desert spread below. "I'm sorry," Jacob said quietly, "for all of it, the death, the loss, the pain I've brought." Naeli took his hand, her grip fierce. "You brought change. Yes, but change was coming whether you arrived or not. At least this way. We faced it together." She paused, looking out at the harsh landscape that was both prison and freedom for her people. "My grandmother once told me that the spirits send us the teachers we need, not always the ones we want. You taught us that not all whites are enemies. Perhaps someday, that knowledge will matter." "And you?" Jacob asked. "What have you learned?" She smiled, tired but undefeated. "That love can bloom even in the harshest ground. That a poor rancher from Copper Creek can become a warrior of the Apache. That the spirits have plans we cannot always see." Below them, the band was already adapting, already surviving. Children who had fled in terror that morning now played quietly while adults planned and worked. It was the Apache way, to bend without breaking, to find life in the midst of death. "What happens now?" Jacob asked. "Now?" Naeli leaned against him, drawing strength and giving it in equal measure. "Now we live. We find new places, new ways. We raise children who know both worlds. We keep the stories alive, and we never forget. Not the pain, but more importantly, not the love that saw us through it." As the sun set on their first day as refugees, painting the sky in shades of loss and hope, Jacob understood that his transformation was complete. He'd come to the Apache as a desperate man fleeing his failures. He remained as a warrior who had found his truth. The price had been higher than anyone could have imagined, paid in blood and sorrow. But the reward, belonging, purpose, love, made every sacrifice worthwhile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers in a world increasingly hostile to Apache existence. But tonight, surrounded by his true people, holding the woman who had saved his soul, Jacob McAllister knew he was exactly where the spirits had meant him to be. The ceremony took place beneath a canopy of stars, in a hidden valley where ancient petroglyphs watched over the gathering like silent witnesses. Despite the recent losses and constant danger, The Apache had insisted on proper rituals. A wedding, they said, was an affirmation of life in the face of death, of hope despite despair. Jacob stood before the sacred fire, wearing traditional Apache clothing gifted by the elders, soft deerskin decorated with beadwork that told stories of courage and transformation. His heart hammered as he waited, but not from fear. This was the moment when his journey from desperate rancher to Apache warrior would be sealed in the most profound way. Nayeli emerged from the gathering darkness like a vision. Her wedding dress was white doeskin, adorned with hundreds of tiny shells that caught the firelight, her long hair woven with eagle feathers and silver ornaments. But it was her eyes that captured Jacob, dark pools reflecting both the flames and the stars, holding love and determination in equal measure. Ayana walked beside her sister, having taken the place of their deceased parents in the ceremony. Her face showed pride mixed with lingering worry for what this union might bring, but she had given her blessing freely. Chief Naichi presided over the ceremony, his ancient voice carrying across the hushed gathering. He spoke in Apache, with Ayana translating the crucial parts for Jacob, though after months among them, he understood more than he once thought possible. Two paths converged tonight, the chief intoned. One born of this land, one led here by spirits. Separate, they were incomplete. Together, they form a new trail into tomorrow. The rituals were unlike anything from Jacob's Protestant upbringing, yet they felt more sacred than any church service he'd attended. Nayeli's grandmother brought forward a beautifully woven blanket, explaining its significance. When two become one, they must shelter each other from all storms, she said, wrapping it around both their shoulders. This blanket has covered 4 generations of unions. May it bless yours with the same strength. They exchanged gifts according to tradition. Jacob offered a necklace of turquoise he'd traded his last valuable possession for, while Nayeli presented him with a hunting knife that had belonged to her father. Each gift represented their commitment to provide for and protect one another. As part of the ceremony, both had to speak their truths before the gathered band. Nayeli went first, her voice clear and strong. I choose this man not despite our differences, but because of what those differences have taught us. He came as a stranger, but stands now as a warrior. He brought change, yes, and pain, yes, but also healing and hope. In his eyes, I see my future. In his heart, I find my home. Jacob's throat tightened with emotion as he spoke his own truth. I was lost when the spirits guided me to you. Everything I thought mattered had turned to dust, but in losing my old life, I found something infinitely more precious. A people who judge by deeds, not blood. A woman whose courage humbles me daily, and a purpose worth any sacrifice. I pledge not just my love, but my life to Nayeli and to all her people, who are now my people, forever. The ceremony included blessings from elders, songs that had been sung at Apache weddings for countless generations, and rituals of binding that symbolized the interweaving of 2 lives. When Chief Naichi finally pronounced them united, the gathering erupted in celebration despite their precarious circumstances. The feast was modest. Their reduced circumstances allowed for no excess, but the joy was abundant. Even warriors who had initially opposed Jacob now offered congratulations. Karuk clasped his shoulder with genuine warmth. You are my brother now. Truly. May your union be blessed with many children to carry on our ways. As the evening progressed, dancers performed traditional celebration dances, their movements telling stories of love persevering through trials. Jacob and Nayeli sat together, receiving well wishes and advice from elders, some of it making Nayeli blush and Jacob grin despite his limited understanding of the jokes. But even in celebration, reality intruded. Scouts maintained a vigilant watch, weapons were kept close, and plans were discussed for the band's next movement. They couldn't stay in one place long, not with the army actively searching. Late in the evening, as festivities wound down, old Tahoma approached the newlyweds. His face, creased by loss and years, held a solemnity that quieted their joy. I have thought much on you, Jacob McAllister, he said slowly. When my grandson died, I wanted to hate you. It would have been easier. He paused, studying Jacob with eyes that had seen too much. But hate is a luxury we cannot afford. You have proven yourself, and more, you give me hope. Hope? Jacob asked, surprised. That understanding is possible, that not all whites see us as animals, that perhaps my great-grandchildren might live in a world where Apache and white can exist without bloodshed. He placed a gnarled hand on Jacob's shoulder. It is a small hope, but in these dark times, even small hopes matter. As the old man walked away, Ayanna joined them for a private moment. He speaks truth, she said quietly. What you represent, it matters. Not just for us, but for those who come after. She looked at her sister with fierce love. Guard each other well. The path ahead is uncertain. When they finally retired to the wedding shelter, a special wickiup prepared for newlyweds, the weight of the day's emotions settled over them. Outside, guards kept watch and the camp settled into uneasy sleep. But inside their private world, time seemed to pause. No regrets? Nayeli asked, echoing her question from months before, but with deeper meaning now. Jacob pulled her close, breathing in the scent of sage and sweetgrass in her hair. How could I regret finding you, finding this? He gestured to encompass not just their shelter, but everything beyond. The people, the life, the purpose. I was empty before, just going through motions. Now I'm alive. They talked through the night, sharing dreams and fears, planning for a future that seemed impossibly uncertain. They spoke of children who would know both worlds, of finding sanctuary, perhaps in Mexico, where Apache bands still moved freely, of keeping traditions alive even as the old ways faded. As dawn approached, they emerged to find the camp already stirring. The band would move today, heading south toward hoped-for safety. But first, Chief Naichi called everyone together for a final ceremony. Yesterday, we witnessed a union that would have seemed impossible one season ago, he said. A white man becoming Apache, not through birth, but through choice, courage, and love. Let this remind us, we are not defeated while we can still adapt, still grow, still find new ways to survive. He turned to Jacob and Nayeli. Your marriage is more than personal joy. It is a bridge between worlds, a seed of possibility in barren ground. Nurture it well, for all our sakes. As the band prepared to move, Jacob stood with his new wife, watching the sun rise over the desert landscape. He thought of his father, wondered what that stern man would think of his son now. Would he see failure or transformation, betrayal or the deepest kind of loyalty? He would be proud, Nayeli said, reading his thoughts as she so often did. Perhaps not at first, but in time, you became more than he dreamed. Not just a man with land, but a man with purpose. The journey ahead would be hard. They were refugees now, hunted by an army that grew stronger while Apache numbers dwindled. The old ways were dying, crushed beneath the wheels of what men called progress. But in this moment, with his wife beside him and his adopted people preparing for another day of survival, Jacob felt rich beyond measure. As they mounted horses and began the trek south, Nayeli began to sing, an old Apache traveling song her mother had taught her. Other voices joined in, creating a harmony that spoke of endurance, of hope, of refusing to surrender even when the world seemed determined to erase you. Jacob McAllister, once a poor rancher with nothing but pride and stubborn determination, rode into an uncertain future as a warrior of the Apache. The title meant more than survival. It meant belonging, purpose and love that transcended all boundaries. Behind them, the abandoned camp held only cold fire pits and memories. Ahead lay challenges that would test every bond forged in these canyons. But between past and future rode a band of people who refused to be broken. And among them, two hearts that had found each other across an impossible divide. The spirits had indeed worked their mysterious ways, bringing together a desperate white man and a proud Apache woman to create something new, not just a marriage, but a testament to the power of love over fear, understanding over hatred, and courage over convention. Their story had begun with violence by red rocks and a choice to stand for what was right. It continued now with each step toward an uncertain tomorrow, Proof that sometimes the greatest adventures weren't about reaching a destination, but about discovering who you were meant to become along the way. In the distance, an eagle circled high above, its cry echoing across the canyons. A blessing, the elders said, from the spirits who watched over brave hearts and impossible loves. Jacob and Nayeli rode on, hands touching across the space between their horses, their love a light against the darkness, their union a bridge across the chasm of two worlds that seemed destined to remain forever apart. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. If you're enjoying these tales of frontier romance and adventure, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more stories that bring the American frontier to life. Share your thoughts about Jacob and Nayeli's journey and what touched your heart the most. Until next time, partners.